Hello, everyone, and welcome to podcast number 3 of the Health and Fitness Podcast. Once again, I am your host, Mr. Correale, and welcome and thank you for listening. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please email them to me at coachcorreale@gmail.com. Correale is spelled Correale. And I invite you to comment, have a question. I enjoy answering your questions. There's two good ones today that I'm going to look into. But first, I want to go into our kinesiology principle for the day. And so to do that, I created a little slideshow to um, entice and interact with our visual learners out there. There we go. Now I can't see myself, but I'm just going to double check. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to speak to all of you about today is the principle of the action of muscles. So whether your goal is to increase your athleticism, strength, size, hypertrophy, okay, whenever you hear that term hypertrophy, that's just essentially you want to increase the size of the muscle. We have to take a little bit of a dive into the idea of how the muscle actually works, the action of muscle. And last podcast, we touched upon the idea of how the nervous system plays this role within creating a muscle twitch or a subsequent contraction within large and small motor units. So the first point there says movements are the result of the coordinated and controlled action of a number of muscles. So when we look at the very simple task of picking something up off the ground, it's usually not going to be one single muscle that is going to be involved. Yes, it may be one or two major muscles that are going to contract or shorten, but there are other muscles that are working and are at play to ensure that movement happens. Now, when we look at the general grouping, the naming of muscles, we can see there's flexors, there's extensors, there's abductors, adductors, and rotators. And so we talk about these as groups of muscles that have to cooperate together in unison to perform a bicep curl or a hamstring curl or a squat, a leg extension, whatever it may be. So we have to take into account there's groups of muscles that perform that same task in order to allow the movement to be controlled and coordinated. Now, from an athletic perspective, if you're performing a squat, you want to make sure that we have enough strength within the flexors and the extensors of the legs to get a nice, deep, strong squat. But we also will require stabilizing muscles and muscles that allow us to maintain that nice stiff spine and torso and intra-abdominal pressure. And we'll get into that in a moment. So we see this term in kinesiology, this term called movers, okay? And there are prime and assistant movers. So a prime mover can be described as a major contributor to the movement. So I use the example here of the bicep is the main is the prime mover in elbow flexion, okay? Your hamstring muscle will be the prime mover in flexion of the knee. Now, the assistant mover doesn't provide a major contribution to the movement, but it can assist in others. So if we go back to the bicep, yes, it's involved in the flexion of the elbow. Remember, flexion we talk about is the shortening of the angle, the decreasing of the angle between the joint, between the two participating bones. And we have to realize, and this comes into the idea of where the muscle runs, its origin, where it comes from, where it's attached, where it's fixated, its origin and insertion. So knowing that, then we can get an idea of what other movements it will assist in. And we look at, let's say, like a pull movement, like doing a chin up or a pull up, and people think, oh, it's a great exercise for your back, and it is, but there's some degree of bicep flexion that has to happen that can actually assist you within the movement. There's a degree of abdominal tension that if you engage and if you have during a chin up or a pull up, it's going to help you with that movement. they're not the prime movers, but they're going to assist in the movement. So when we look at planning out a protocol or planning out a program, we have to be aware of the term accessory movements, because those accessory movements, many years ago, we used to call them bodybuilding days. Okay, so when training for football, we stick to the front squats, deadlifts, the Olympic lifts, but then there has to be some program time for the accessory work, bicep curls, tricep extensions, lat pull downs, um, things that don't show up on the game sheet or the score sheet for athletic performance, but they are going to assist with these other movements. So if we look at this idea here, so this individual has a glass in his hand and wants to participate in the elbow flexion. And so we can see where the prime mover is. The two heads of the biceps brachii, are going to allow for the elbow to flex and this cup to come higher up. Now, in order for that to happen, we have this muscle called brachioradialis. It's in our forearm. If you have, played any tennis or squash, maybe badminton, where you need to have the supination and the pronation of the wrist, this is going to be a major contributing muscle to this. Well, the brachioradialis now is a synergistic muscle, and we'll talk about synergist in a moment, which is going to assist with the movement. It has to have a certain level of tonicity or tension in order to assist for that movement, to make it nice and coordinated. If we have enough flexion going on in the bicep, but there's relaxation in the forearm, then this cup is going to fall out of this individual's hand. So there has to be a synergistic movement or a synergistic contraction that's going to help with the overall coordination of the movement, being this bicep curl that's here. Brachialis, which runs underneath the bicep brachii, also play the same synergistic role. Think of it as developing tension. If you wanted to do a push-up position plank or high plank, you cannot be lax within your glutes, your butt, and your core or column or whatever we're calling it. You have to synergistically engage those and have them firing in order for you to keep that nice high plank. And then eventually, if you're turning that into a moving plank, which is essentially a push-up, you have to tie in that tension. You have to tie in those synergistic movements in a coordinated fashion. And this brings us to talking about antagonistic pairs. And this is a slide taken from one of my lectures in my kin class. And we have to remember, when we talk about that bicep contraction, that flexion, the triceps have to be in relaxation. Okay, the opposing muscle, it's not working, it's not going to be firing, but it has to be in a mode of relaxation. So all over the body, we have these examples of opposing pairs, these opposing muscles that are going to assist with this kind of coordinated movement within the body. And in the lower body, we have the quadriceps and the hamstrings. The hamstrings are your flexors, your extensors are your quadriceps. Right? So in the second point there, it says when two limbs flex at a joint, one muscle is contracted, shortens. Okay, remember, all muscles just pull, they shorten. And while the other muscle is lengthening. Okay. Now, is it actively lengthening? Some would say that it's passively lengthening, but there has to be a neural connection to that opposing or that lengthening muscle to send signals to say, hey, just lengthen out or relax. It's not going totally limp. It's not becoming flaccid where it's non-functional. There's a nervous signal that's being sent there to allow it to go into lengthening. Remember, if I have that isometric contraction, I am having full contraction of both the tricep and the bicep, and my arm isn't going to move at all. Right? There's no movement around the joint. Both are firing, doesn't offer movement. If I need to have movement, one has to be contracting while the other is lengthening. Okay? And this is the basis for allowing any type of flexion or extension at any joint. For some sports and activities, it may be beneficial at some point to have both these antagonistic pairs, these opposing pairs in flexion. If I think of soccer, if we wanted to kick the ball or make a nice long hard pass, it's to the benefit of the player to stiffen their ankle. In order to stiffen your ankle, you have to have the flexors and the extensors both firing at the same time, so we don't have any dorsal or plantar flexion within the foot, which can alter the force or directionality of the pass itself. Okay, so we call these the flexor and the extensor, these antagonistic muscles at a joint, where we have to have this kind of delicate balance between contraction and lengthening, okay, shortening or stretching out. The agonist muscle is the one that is responsible for moving that body part. So in a bicep curl, our prime mover would be the bicep, but we would also call this the agonist as well, because it is responsible for that movement. And the muscle that's counteracting or lengthening the movement, we would call the antagonistic muscle, okay, between the two. So this brings us to, once again, programming and protocol, right? If you are an athlete, even a recreational, fitness enthusiast, it's very easy to lose track of, am I working both the agonist and the antagonist? For people who want to build more mass in your legs, you have to squat. There's no doubt about it. But with every squat that you do, with every set of squats that you do, you should be in the back of your mind planning for, okay, what am I doing for the posterior? What am I doing for my hamstrings? What am I doing for the antagonistic pair, the other opposing pair of that muscle? So some people will overlook that. And so if you ever heard any readings, you may have heard if someone is quad dominant, well, maybe they've built up their quads too much, or maybe they have maybe too much mass within the quads and not enough compensation within the hamstrings themselves. So that has to be an important part of your programming and protocol. Talked about stabilizers before, okay? And these muscles, and when we look at the activity that's being performed here by this young person is your classical horizontal press or your bench press. These are muscles that are going to be located at the end of the prime mover, and they're going to stabilize the attachment. Okay, so if we're talking about some type of shoulder press overhead, or it could be that horizontal press that's shown here, we need to keep the shoulder in this nice locked, strong position. Well, we're going to need other associated muscles around the shoulder girdle, your scapula essentially, to keep it in place to allow you to move with some type of force through that range of motion. All right. So these stabilizing muscles are usually very smaller muscles. They're not very big. They don't get very big, but in unison, in concert together, they're gonna do a great job of helping those contracting muscles stabilize the movement, generate tension, right? If you can generate tension around the shoulder girdle, if I was doing a military press, this is going to put me in a stronger position to press or move my scapula in one concerted, coordinated effort. Okay. If you don't generate enough tension, you fail out. You can't match the load that you're trying to resist or you're trying to push. So that's also a very important part of why we have to be aware of the accessory lifts. You have to be aware of doing those less glamorous, maybe high repetition accessory movements that are going to be helping those prime movers. Okay, and when we saw this in the very first slide, this idea of synergist. Okay, so it says here, when a muscle contracts, it will cause motion at all the joints it crosses if they are free to move. So if I want to pitch a baseball or throw a football, I want to be able to have a nice fluid, through the stages of the throw, nice fluid motion and an eventual follow through. The contractions will fire in a coordinated effort in order to allow for maximal velocity to be applied to the football or the baseball or whatever it is. But what we end up having sometimes, and think of that glass example. If I wanted to bring a cup of hot coffee to my mouth, I need synergistic contraction in my forearm to keep the cup there. I can't be lax because I can do all the flexion in the world, but now that cup of coffee is on my lap. I'm not being able to hold that upright. So we end up having smaller synergistic muscles that are going to help to stiffen or inhibit movement that will work along with the bigger movement that's needed, say the flexion of the elbow in order to put this cup to your mouth. The example that I have here is the wrist position in a clenched fist. So when we make a fist and we want to punch, we have muscles that are synergistically keeping that fist nice and stiff, right? It's not going to be lax. I can make a fist here, and now I'm almost in flexion of the wrist here. I almost have to be in a position of extension, of almost a little bit of hyperextension to throw a proper punch. If I were to hit someone like this, I would get what's called the boxer's fracture, which is a break within the wrist bones that are here. So I have muscles that are synergistically going to help to stiffen the wrist, and then I can associate the punch movement with that extension of my shoulder girdle, the extension of my triceps, and allow myself to perform that activity, that punch, so to speak. Okay. So I hope you've taken something from this mini lesson on synergists, stabilizers, and antagonistic pairs. You may not have thought about it or known about it, but kind of keep this in mind when you see a program or you see an activity online, or you want to get into a program. See if it kind of suits your needs first of all, and see if it kind of checks those boxes that you require. Okay, so I'm just going to end this and we'll go back over. There we go. Oops. And we'll get to the questions for this week. And thank you for those people who I've spoken to. Please continue to bring in your questions and comments. Fawaz, about a couple weeks ago, he had a great question. And his question was based on mindset and discipline when training, even if there is no end goal, right? And this is really another part of that kind of athlete's dilemmas is how do you properly time up and plan for a season? But when that season is done, what now? And the idea of discipline, and that really comes from within, right? It's beneficial for you to have some type of goal in mind, but this comes back to the idea of your why. Okay, like why are you doing what you're doing, right? If your why is strong enough, whether you're a competitive athlete or just a recreational fitness enthusiast, it'll be enough to get you up out of bed and get yourself moving, right? Your why is the reason why you go through all the hours of training, maybe the research, buying all the gear, and actually doing the work itself. And if your why is strong enough, that'll keep you coming back day in and day out over and over again. And everyone's why is different. If you're an athlete, your why may be to be the best possible athlete in your sport at a position, whatever it may be. Your why may be to achieve a certain time, a lift, a team goal, maybe an individualistic goal, whatever it may be. But when you look at, and I think where Fawaz, where you're going with this is that when you shift to off season, right? When you come out of when you end your season, you come into off season, there has to be some type of downtime. There has to be some type of rest that you have to incur, because the body is very resilient. The body is, especially youth, right? Youth, all of you out there, you're very resilient. But if you play a sport, you get dinged, you get hurt, you get a little injured, something gets sore, you don't have the time to rest. So at the end of a season, you have to give yourself that. You have to give yourself that rest. And I know we come from a society and a mindset where it's like, go 100% every single day, no pain, no gain. And we have to change that. We have to change that because remember, you don't build skill through exhaustion, right? When exercise is exhaustive and you're just doing it, but you're exhausted doing it, you're redlining, you're not building skill. You're not building skill. You're doing something else. You're maybe increasing the propensity of injury, so to speak. So at the end of an athletic season, there should be some type of downtime, okay? And it depends on your activity, right? If you are a collision sport athlete, like a football player, taking 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the end of a season and doing nothing is great, is good. Your body gets to repair, and then you start your protocols. That downtime also, it recharges your batteries. It maybe gets you doing some different things, get into a different routine, but you may start feeling, oh, I miss competing, I miss training, I miss hanging out with my athletic buddies or going to the gym. So that's where that downtime can also help as well. Even if you are a non-athlete but a recreational lifter, you should throughout your year, and it may naturally occur during, let's say, summer vacation where you don't train, you don't do anything, right? What one thing that COVID has done is, without, my family going on vacation, I really haven't programmed a downtime, an off, where I take a week or 2 weeks off. I always look forward to that family vacation where is, gone for 1 week to some, maybe, some destination. And I knew, okay, I'm not lifting this entire week. I don't care where the numbers go. It's good for me. It's good for my body. It's good all the way around. So you're going to do that, and you can be okay with yourself for doing that. Okay, um, your why for training should also encompass the need for that downtime and that rest. Okay, at the same time, if you miss training sessions, don't beat yourself up. Life happens. Okay, stuff gets in the way, right? If you have an initial goal of, okay, I'm going to lift 5 days a week, and you've never lifted before, that may be a little bit too lofty. Start at 2 weeks, ramp up to 3, right? Then go to 5, right? Um, Taking that time to properly plan out uh, is gonna make you increase your longevity within this kind of strength realm. I hope I'm kind of answering your question, Fawaz. Now, this was connected. Your second part of your question was said losing discipline and work ethic after you finished the final goal. So how can a person keep that discipline even after achieving the end goal? So there's a great saying, no challenge, no change. Okay, and I like this saying because if there's no challenge out you, then what's changing? Well, the challenge doesn't necessarily have to be your sporting event, your race, your game. The challenge can be, hey, I want to learn how to bench press, or I want to learn how to get my first pull up, my first push up. I want to learn how to power clean or do a clean and jerk, right? So your training, then you can tie in that kind of challenge to keep it fresh, to almost make up a competition, almost to make up lack of being redundant, like a goal for yourself, right? Um, Someone years ago, when I started working out with kettlebells, they said to me, you have to go to certifications. And I said, yeah, okay, I get it. I'll go to some certifications where you learn. But kettlebell certifications have a physical test at the end of them. And so I thought to myself, all right, what happens if you fail? Well, if you fail, you don't get the certification. And I thought, this is amazing. This is exactly what I needed, because now the challenge is the certification test at the end of 3 days of instructional kettlebell time. And um, it was good to kind of train to anticipate for that. It gives you purpose in training, but it wasn't necessarily like a season or a team or a sport. It was something that you kind of build up and say, hey, I have this end task I have to perform. Let's build up for that. So just remember, your exercise doesn't have to be exhaustive. You have this idea that fatigue doesn't build skill. So taking no breaks and continually burning yourself out isn't going to build skill. Proper practice builds skill. Okay. Proper practice will build skills necessary. So this is, what I'm getting at after this long-winded response is if you have a properly developed program or training protocol, it should plan for downtime. It should plan for you to ramp up numbers at one time, come down at another, do some maintenance. And that should take care of the discipline factor, because there's enough change to keep things fresh, to keep things interesting, to keep you coming back for more. All right. There's nothing worse when people come and talk to me and said, oh my God, I tried this workout. I saw online this guy was doing it. It was, oh my God, it was so hard. First thing is, well, are you going to do it again? And they, no, I can't do that again. Well, then was it really worth it? Then that was purely by sense. That was a workout that may have not fit into your training protocol, right? Your training should be repeatable. You should come back every single day and be able to hit it and be able to then build upon that idea of proper practice and skill development. So Fawaz, I hope that answered your question. And remember, last point, practice makes permanent. So if you're practicing proper form, the proper form will become permanent. If you're just practicing poor form, poor technique, you're making that permanent. So you have to see, or maybe seek coaching, seek advice, making sure that you're using proper technique within your training protocols. All right. So with that being said, I'll end here. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, please email me at coachcorreale@gmail.com. And I look forward to answering your questions. Someone had asked for a demonstration on the deadlift. And so what I'll do is I'll record and send out to the group proper setup and deadlift technique. I'll film that from my, I can't do it here in this little room, but I'll film it from my garage gym and send that out to you. And if you have your own training videos that you like to share or feedback on them, I would love to see those as well. So you can even send those as an attachment via that email at coachcorreale@gmail.com. So thank you once again for listening. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me, and take care, be safe, and get strong.